Welcome to the Speaking Podcast. You can find all our episodes on speakingpodcast.com. We're also on BitChute and YouTube. You'll find the links in the podcast description. I'm also a podcasting coach, and I've got 4 other podcasts. You'll find everything on bio.link/podcaster. My guest today, I'm actually looking forward to this because, especially what he's achieved, but executive coach, keynote speaker, strategic marketing advisor, but he goes by kind of 2 names, Robbie Phoenixx and Robert Zeas. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Roy.
No problem. So I suppose you might introduce yourself as the name, what's it about, and then a bit more about yourself.
Sure. So my birth name is Robert Zeas. I lived a corporate life of 23 years, and I served 2 Fortune 100 companies, directly contributing $254 million as a competitive intelligence lead. That is my professional standard of that time period. And I transitioned into music full time nearly 4 years ago. And in that transition, I took all the creative learnings along the way and rebranded myself Robbie Phoenixx inside of the music industry. So I hope that's clear.
Excellent. So, and the band, and what's the band and what do you do in the band?
Yeah. So the band name is Octane. We're on Twitter, Facebook, all the major channels. And we've had a release through Sony The Orchard in partnership with Curtain Call Records called The Reckoning. And it's a 4-piece rock band. We sound a lot like if you bash together Linkin Park, Metallica, Stone Temple Pilots all into a giant, cauldron and spit out a rock band.
No, brilliant. I know I bought albums from all of them ones you just mentioned. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. So you just kind of threw it out there, 254 million. That's like $250 million, if I'm correct. So
correct.
You might that's a lot. So I know that you've kind of landed you've worked with the big boys, Fortune 100. Not everybody does that. So I suppose get your journey into getting them, and then how you're able to achieve such fantastic results.
Well, thank you for labeling it that way, Roy. I'll tell you very plainly with the audience and many that are listening that aspire to that end. I started humbly. I started with my wife paying my turnpike tolls and gas to have a start of a career. So let's just start where it really is honest and factual. And I hope your audience will appreciate that authenticity in this. I'll also tell you that over the first 3 years of my career, because of the team around me, including my wife, Joanne, I became the top salesperson nationwide at Verizon Business Mid-Market Enterprise. So the top salesperson started off with 112% of objective, then went to 430% of objective for the following year. Inside of the first quarter of the last year that I served in sales, I was on track for 840% of my goal for the year. It was phenomenal.
Wow.
And so that was the start of the career, was in sales. And then I went into engineering. I was very blessed to have a lot of talent around me that was tenured in that role. And there were a lot of technical people for technical sake in that role that led to over 15 million of direct contribution, leading sales with a bit of an engineering slant. And then ultimately I found my true calling in corporate life, which was leading and founding competitive intelligence. In that role, I contributed nearly $100 million in Verizon, and then another nearly as much, 120 plus million at what became today Lumen Technologies. And then ultimately found consulting work with other tech companies like AT&T. So that Fortune 100 branding really started in that kind of incubus of corporate life. And there's a lot to the competitive work. And then I found over many years of introspecting on Robbie Phoenixx's value prop, you don't get younger every day you go along. And I realized that there's a legacy to be built around music and film narrative music in particular that led to Octane, the band, and also Robbie Phoenixx, the brand.
And with the achievement that you got with Horizon, or Verizon, whatever it's called, as an American company, that's incredible. But what was your mindset? What was going on? Because there's a lot of people out there, salespeople, and especially in real estate, because I worked a lot in real estate, and they are so bad that was it self-study? What was it that was making you so good?
Honestly, it came down to passion for excellence. And I know that sounds like a bumper sticker, and I don't mean it to be that way. But when you're up typically till 1 to 3 in the morning during the workday, and you're either in the office or you're back home working remote, and you kind of chug along because you have a family and they need to eat. So you might spend 2 hours plus settling the home and having the kids ready for school the next day, let's say. you just have a passion to do more. Like, it wasn't unusual for me as an engineer to get calls at 11 o'clock at night from my field sales team. It wasn't unusual to get calls throughout the day from national project managers when I was responsible for a mid-Atlantic region as an engineer 3. And in sales, I will assure you, I took stuff in on weekends, I took things in on evenings, and certainly vacations to further educate myself, including the products, including the underlying architecture and technology, so that I could relate to my colleagues in a little more informed way. And most importantly, keep the honesty with the client. You know, when you're in sales, a lot of times the temptation is you can do everything for everyone or many things for many. I was one that would come in and say what we would do well and where we can deliver value, and also where we will not deliver that value well. And I think that reputation over time really paid off quite well.
Yeah, brilliant. And like on the opposite side of the spectrum, then what I see with people is, like, if they're working till 5 o'clock, they're kind of put their coats on at 20 to 5 and they're off, their phone is off, they don't answer. And then they're the ones complaining, or does the people, they expect the raise before they'll do the extra work, and it never happens. It's always the people that I see are successful are the ones that weekend, late and everything.
Yeah, I was very fortunate to have been raised by, in my particular case, and I say this is a blessing in my own individual belief of my life. I'm not saying this has to be everyone's, but I have a half Latin background and a half American. So my father is from Ecuador, and his upbringing was an incredibly high standard on himself for not only discipline and learning, but for execution and career. And on my mother's side, I got a whole lot of creative and a whole lot of heart. So you put it all together. And of course, when I'm working for a company like Verizon, or what later on I was called by the senior leadership team of Level 3 Communications, what is now Lumen Technologies, directly to relocate across the country and serve that intelligence role, I can assure you that honor in myself and my heart made me 10 times more committed than many to do excellent things, and excellent things all around me, not just for the company or the shareholders or the end customers, yet also for my colleagues all the way up to the chief marketing officer. So that's kind of how I rolled in that world.
Brilliant. And just kind of going back a bit, how you got kind of, because I know you're doing keynote speaking, but how you actually, you know, your journey in speaking, but also did you apply the same kind of excellence in making yourself the best at that?
Well, honestly, Roy, I feel as though I'm a work in progress there, and I've been speaking now on and off for 15 years. So you would have noted the very first opportunity, much like a humble beginning in sales and a tech career, it was very similar in the speaking world. So I had a vice president marketing at Verizon, and I also had a senior director that encouraged me to get into a speaking realm because I was leading intelligence briefings in the senior executive team in the company, and they saw that competency. I was also very knowledgeable, so therefore very authoritative in speaking to sales and engineering teams because of my background having served in those roles. So they said, hey, Robbie, why don't you go figure out a good conference to maybe plant yourself in and kind of see if you can put some value behind that equation. So I was invited to be a part of a panel of experts that were actual senior executives of competitors of Verizon. And that was at the Future of Cable Business Services conference in New York. They had annual conferences that were held every year, and they had panels of experts. Well, they're having me come up in a mid-senior role in a Fortune 100 to basically go neck to neck with senior vice presidents at Comcast Business, a president at a fiber optic company that was based out of New York called Lightpath at the time. And you really had to dance with these guys. You had to understand how they looked at the market intelligence, how they looked at analyst relations, how they looked at the technology enablement, and how they looked at their value props that they were bringing to market, and really understand how to compete at that level, which was more of a 30,000-foot view than the day-to-day stuff I'd been doing in Verizon for the 8 years prior. So it was a great training ground, and I'll say I was very welcome. Alan Bresnick was the senior editor at Light Reading. He's still there. He's still on my LinkedIn profile, by the way, as a recommender. And ultimately, it was awesome because from that experience led to other things when I moved to Colorado to work at Lumen Technologies. Again, that was at the senior request of the senior leadership. So the chief executive officer at the time, the chief marketing officer were directly involved in that hiring process. And ultimately, I found myself at the Global Innovation and Leadership Conference in Silicon Valley. That led to other like general session speaking opportunities inside of the competitive intelligence realms, and ultimately speaking beyond, right? Beyond tech even. So it was a humble start, I'll say honestly. It was a great training ground, and it was a safe one to be in because you had editors with a lot of integrity and willingness to hear perspectives and broaden the perspectives with their audience and the learning along the way. And I think for me, as I became to find myself more in the artist side, so music, there's kind of a natural synergy in my heart between performing on stage with a guitar in Sonic Octane as Robbie Phoenixx and taking the mic and imparting some goodwill and learning and hopefully some introspection to those that are hearing you on the other end of conferences. Because you go to conferences, and quite candidly, a lot of these are very stiff, very boring. Like the more Fortune 100, Fortune 20 company you are generally, unless you're Elon Musk or someone, oh my gosh, it's like, give me the anesthesia already, put me to sleep. So it's kind of cool to loosen them up a bit, and you can wear a John Barbados, look like Tony Hawk, and just take the stage, man, because they want to see you. They want to know what you're about. They want to know how you tick and why you can bring in $250 million.
Brilliant, brilliant. And I want to delve into that a bit further, but I just want, like, because I seen you were also on a summit. I forget the name of it. I've written down there, the Global Legal Development Summit, and that was over. So that was online, yeah. And
yeah, it was actually in 2020, as I recall, and it was at the invitation of a rather savvy entrepreneur that's based out of the Netherlands. And he saw me speak at one of the strategic competitive intelligence conferences in Orlando. And he said, man, who is this guy that is in corporate doing so well? He's like phenomenal. And he's going into music. Like, does he have like a suicide wish? Like what's he doing with himself in his career? Right. So lo and behold, I didn't know at the time he was supremely networked with the International Bar Association as an entrepreneur, also as a speaker, a keynote. And he said, this is a brand I have to bring into the mix. So it was 40,000 attendees at that conference that I was able to interview in front of on a live stream. And that was a lot of fun. The same studio, in fact, where that was held, right here in Longmont, Colorado, where I live.
But you've got kind of the ability to bring the energy, because I looked at that, and even just now, just interacting with you, you know, you're the positive, upbeat, and everything, and not everybody's able to do that. And I think the listeners are more engaged when they see that.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to be said for that, and honestly, you should see me with a guitar, maybe another interview, right? We'll whip it out and show you some cool tunes, and I'll send you some produced content. We have over 30 terabytes of content, and I assure you, when you connect with an audience with a song and you've got 100-watt amplifiers behind you and a drummer that's about 100 plus decibels and vocals and a bass and backtracks, you've got to really be able to bring it. And I feel no differently when it comes to work in a corporate life, or I feel no different for that matter when you're holding intelligence briefings, because the senior executives frankly deserve the passion too, right? You got to really go to the mat with these guys because they're putting a lot on the line to serve in those roles. And, you know, I guess that's just how I roll.
And with the skill set with your own band that you're doing, is it your plan to kind of do that for other bands as well, because they wouldn't have access to that?
You know, I don't know where that leads long term. I will say I took an unorthodox approach in Sonic Octane starting in 2016. It was moonlighting with a corporate life for a number of years, 3 years almost there. And it was kind of an evolution. Like, you know, you can't make your money off CDs, right? So they call it mechanical royalties are down, and streaming is up, right? So 3 of the main US major distributors for music in the US, so Sony, Universal, etc., they have a percentage interest, equity interest in major streaming companies. So what do you do to make your living? Because you're making less than 1/100 of a cent per spin on a streaming platform. And so it was kind of a neat riddle for me, a puzzle, much like in the competitive intelligence research world that I did in tech. And I came to realize if you bring in volunteer labor, like in the way of film students as your starting point for your brand conception and your B-roll, and then you layer that with the idea of getting into film production narrative work that looks like Dr. Zhivago, David Lean, it's like the quality viscerally is impeccable, because there's nothing in the rock brand category that does it that way. And then you bring in independent filmmakers that have major distribution with, say, Amazon Prime Video. Bada bing, 2 years later, we have over 30 million song plays were submitted for daytime Emmy consideration. And we're literally looking at ourselves going, the sky's the limit with this project. And we didn't have to cut our teeth in the clubs and sell our souls like everyone else.
Brilliant. And with, I mean, because like, I presume you'd have to kind of travel around, and also with the speaking, that's because I know you've got 3 children. Yeah. How do you navigate that to make kind of life normal for the family?
The first thing I really, and I don't say that everyone has to follow my way by any means, but I say this humbly to all, God is the first thing in our lives. Like, I feel very tremendously grateful to have served, starting broke, hardly able to afford 102-mile drives every day for 8 years of my career in corporate life, were it not for my wife. And I put God in front of that even. And then I would say a little further, it became my wife, right? She became kind of like the octopus or the soothsayer to kind of keep the home a little more stable when dad was kind of working his tail off in corporate life. And it didn't really change much going into music. You would think almost like you can kick back. Some people, they drink or whatever. I don't drink. I don't smoke. I have 0 tattoos. You know, I'm about as straight as it comes. But at the end of the day, you know, you really had to kind of rely on your home. And that's how I was able to manage through. I've got many a story I could share with you another time, perhaps, Roy, if you're interested, on driving a bus through Brooklyn. Because I assure you that is an art and that is not a science. And there's a lot of risk involved and a lot of mishaps, which were very Guns N' Roses or Metallica, if I say so myself. I could tell you about sharing the stage with Corey Taylor at the Pepsi Center here in Denver for 3 songs. I could tell you about meeting Eddie Van Halen, right? Or Slash for that matter. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of grit that goes into that if you're really trying to propel and bring a message that is mission oriented. And in the case of Sonic Octane, we had a partnership filming with Live Nation eventually. Because we were doing so well with the independent film release, I was able to broker goodwill after the unfortunate incident at the Harvest Musical Festival massacre in Las Vegas. And Live Nation came to the table to allow me to film at the exclusive Foundation Room. And for all that footage that we have over 5 continuous days, including what's called Dry Lake in Jean, Nevada, which is where they filmed the movie Casino, for example, with Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci in the desert scene when Pesci's burning out in the desert driving his car. Vegas, you know, Vacation, those types of movies. You know, we've got some amazing footage, and that again served to be a differentiator for our brand and had little to do with the music or even the message in the lyric of the music. It's just the approach was different enough and quality enough that people were actually paying attention.
Excellent. And I see that just from your LinkedIn profile, excuse me, you've been doing a load of volunteering for years, which is kind of, you know, you mentioned your humble beginnings, but it feels like you've constantly wanted to give back, which a lot of people don't do.
Well, Roy, in my heart of hearts, you know, I'll be honest, I feel I should do more. Like, there are a few people in my life and people that are starting to even associate with Sonic Octane through Robbie Phoenixx, through my brand, that to me have been leaders. Like, in the corporate setting, there are a few people like Eric Zeas at Verizon. He's a president. He met with me a month ago. He remembered when I was in the diversity boards supporting the Native American people of Verizon, for example. Or he also remembered me through his leadership team reporting to him, where I supported them with the Enhanced Communities Project at Verizon. Or another example, which is a more recent example I'm super humble about, and I'm hoping I'm worthy for this person at this stage of my life. Her name is Julia Hill. She used to go by the name Julia Butterfly Hill. So for your listeners that may want to Google the name, she was the American that led the environmental efforts for well over a decade here in the United States and then went global. And by that, she lived in her mid-20s in a redwood tree for 27 consecutive months to prove a point that we shouldn't be deforesting redwoods. And what a noble thing she did. And at the end of the day, I look at her life example and I go, there's a lot more that Robbie Phoenixx should be doing, candidly. And yes, I've volunteered quite a bit on boards. I've had 6 years of combined experience there, supporting the old school diversity, I'll call it, not the stuff you see today. And the other part I was supporting absolutely was around, homeless. So building or painting shelters, things like that. And then I try to put a good example in my own personal life. I've donated nearly $10,000 of equipment to various charities over time and or cancer causes. So yeah, I do what I can. I always feel, humbly before God and your audience, there's much more to be done. And I would love to have their support in that over time.
Brilliant. And you mentioned cancer. Was it a song that you did for cancer as well that I saw? Yeah.
Yes, and I'll flip the video teaser to you and also flip the full audio track to you after this meeting so your listeners can download. But it's essentially a song about a mother whose son, or excuse me, a mother who dies of cancer in her son's arms. And it was a song inspired by a former collaborator I've had at Los Angeles, whose name is Rudiger. And he wrote that lyric in testimony to his own mother. So that became a basis of a beautiful song. It's not your typical straight up rock song. It's got a beautiful kind of ballady feel. However, it's very powerful. It's got a lot of heavy distortion in it, a beautiful melody, and it's just gorgeous. And so ultimately, that became a little bit of a side testimony in my own home. My wife has had precancer twice. I've had what could have been precancer twice myself in the last over 2 years. So it's just been one of those moments we realize as we get along in life a little, where we can support communities of interest, including those that have been victims of cancer. And they're nearly, according to the Center for Disease Control in the United States, there's some estimated 600,000 Americans that die of cancer every year. So just imagine the multiple of impact on that around them. And so that song, Heaven Calling, is the name of the song by Sonic Octane. And that's the song we dedicated to those families and those survivors. I have a very close friend of mine who used to be an executive director at Verizon, who's currently under care in the Atlanta area. And I'd like to just humbly suggest that we dedicate that song to him over this podcast. And I hope that you would agree.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Excellent. Brilliant. So, and I mean, that's beautiful what you're doing, and I love all that. With all the building the companies making so much revenue and everything, because I've seen some of the things that you mentioned, and one of them was what leaders do to not motivate their teams when they're trying to. So you might kind of touch on that, because I know just listening, I mean, I've worked for myself for years, but I listen to people that are working in corporations, and they're all depressed from the way that it goes on.
Well, there's a lot that goes on, right? I've never been a direct senior executive of a Fortune 100 company. I've had the privilege for 14 to 15 years of my career serving directly those senior executives. So I have a humble sense of what they go through. I have a sense of their challenges and their pain points, and some things just structurally they cannot move the needle, because in tech it's $1 billion to get into the market generally to begin with in the companies that I serve. And ultimately, I will tell you that there's a lot of a human aspect to it, right? Like motivating people in tech, it's kind of tough to begin with, because people come to their job kind of like, yeah, it's tech, like I'm not Tony Hawk, right? I'm not like Gwyneth Paltrow and Tony Hawk. So why am I here? Like, what's the psychograph for me to identify with a company like, God bless Verizon, God bless Lumen Technologies, and many in their ilk? But ultimately, they're not even close to Tesla, right? They're never going to be that cool. So what's the angle? And so for me, part of it was reaching into the very soul of what it is they're actually attempting to do on a human level. So coaching engineers, coaching sales was an easy block and tackle when I started in the intelligence roles. But ultimately, it has to come to a higher level. And that's where you come to a mastery understanding of network architecture, product development, lifecycle management, market intelligence, and competitive intelligence. They all should be playing a simple symphony together whose narrative makes sense tactically to win. And that's where my expertise really, truly shines, is I can teach companies how to win. And that's through being creative enough to see all those lenses distinctly enough through years and years of training by very good people around me. And that's kind of how it rolls. And these executives, they don't have an easy life. I'll tell you, they really don't. They may get paid a few more bucks. They may wonder later on if it was all worth it in some cases.
And like finding the best, because sometimes what happens in a lot of companies is they tend to say the best at a certain industry, they make them the manager, and they're not really understanding that person. Sometimes they don't really want that, or two, a lot of them don't even train them for the position they're about to put them in. They tend to throw them in and see will they sink or swim, and then next, because they've got so many people working in the field.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth in that too. Like succession planning is not as let's say sexy as it sounds, right? If you're in workforce management and talent development and those three functions in HR, and you've got a grid. I was on the grid once upon a time, of course. And you know, it's a beautiful thing because you kind of have the halo going around when you do things or say things. Yet at the end of the day, you got to prove it, right? And it's got to be year over year. And usually the companies I served, about every 6 months, they're checking out your performance anyhow. And that's a regular conversation ongoing, to say the least. So yeah, there's some people that kind of get into these roles and they have like buyer's regret, or they have remorse because someone promoted them in and they didn't necessarily go looking for it. I'll say you always, the least common denominator, if you can do anything in your career though, is to actually make a difference for the people. And so if you looked at my LinkedIn profile, you'll see dozens of testimonies of people directly from my senior leadership, supply chain, editors from all vetted journals and articles that know me in the industry, and ultimately even my senior leaders. They were all kind enough to put in a good word around the way I approach things. So I think it's not always about being an executive. If I had to say it in a nutshell, yes, it's nice to have the visibility and the exposure to those roles and the understanding of how they manage and what they're looking for out of intelligence work in particular. I think it comes down to a much more human level, though. You've really got to take people further along in life. And surely there have been parallels in Sonic Octane, as I mentioned earlier, partnering with Live Nation, having 30 million song plays on Amazon Prime and a debut release, and further even being submitted for Daytime Emmy consideration as a first film sync deal. You know, I feel as though I've taken much of that upbringing to a state they were never would have been on their own. So quietly proud of that.
That's incredible figures. And because I've heard of a few people say on Spotify, and I mean, there's a few of them, but they don't really get the money that they're supposed to, like, you know, this and it must be hard when they're looking at millions in the downloads and they're waiting for the royalty check. You know, it's like, I don't know, is blockchain technology, because I'm seeing that, you know, that you can actually have smart contracts and everything where the artists are actually getting paid instead of the big boys just, you know, giving you a few crumbs from the table, which it's the one thing that I'm thinking should rock the market.
Well, it's kind of like this. It's not too tough to figure out the math. Like it took me a number of months, but eventually it was pretty simple formula, right? Like, so you've got streaming royalties and you've got like title at the top of the stack, generally. You've got kind of, and not picking on anyone here, but YouTube towards the bottom of the stack. And no matter how you do the numbers, unless you have millions of streams, there's no appreciable revenue really truly coming in, number one. Number two, who cares? Who wants, do I want to be on Spotify today? I don't know about that. To be honest with you, Roy, I would rather sync with a film deal, and any major independent film deal out of Hollywood, say $30 million and up on committed revenue for expense, is going to bring in $50,000 to $150,000 check to the artist. So why am I going to go waste my time on Spotify? God bless Spotify, and I know that they do a lot of good for the world in the way that they can. And Tidal similarly, even more so, because they are a little more artist friendly from what I've seen online and hear. But at the end of the day, it just wasn't the model that I was prepared to walk into when I'm driving a tour bus whose operating base is running about $600 to $1,000 a day to tour New York and come back to Denver. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of the music industry as I see it. And you know, I was very fortunate enough to fund a lot of this through my own family, you know, through savings over many, many years. And so, you know, not every artist is in that position to do that. And so, yeah, I think to your question earlier, it would be interesting to welcome the artists in your listening audience that may want some coaching around how to actually succeed in that marketplace, because it is a treacherous one. And there are many people that may not be honest, that may not give you the right advice up front, that challenge your thinking a little. and get you on a path that will actually be accretive to your earnings over time. So.
Excellent. And you mentioned YouTube. I remember it was the Polish channel, because that's got over a million views. So I started monetizing it, and I know it's about 120,000, 150,000, and I got about $120. And I was like, how much are they charging people to advertise on my podcast? And that's what they're giving me. It's like, that's not even 1%, because I know I have done advertisements with Google and they charge a lot. And, you know, it's sad that they do it that way. Like, and what I've noticed as well is, and I saw with me, not just, I suppose, on YouTube as well, that the numbers before, like, it was growing away, and then it's not. I've looked at a guest that I was having on yesterday, her YouTube, and she had like 40,000 and loads of videos. And then all of a sudden, the last year, there's like 15, 20. Like, you don't go, and she had a lot of subscribers, and it's just, you just lose heart that they control it. And if you start paying them, they disappear. I don't know, have you seen that with the Facebook as well? Because I used to have a load of interaction on Facebook, and now I look and it looks like I'm Billy No Mates, you know, because there's something like 3.1k friends or whatever, and a lot of them are close friends, and they like when I'm putting up. There's nothing. And even, like I said to my mother, I mean, you always give me a thumbs up. She's not even seen it, and all you're seeing now is like sponsorship, like before the trade that it was done. So I suppose kind of gearing in, what do you find? Because what you're doing with the social media, because that's a hard one with the Twitter, with everything. Like, what's your call on that? Because it's a time suck as well.
Roy, you bring up a very relevant thing for us as independents. And I'll be honest with you, and straight as I would be with clients that may want to contact Robbie Phoenixx to have consulting. I'll tell you straight. Number one, do your hashtag research, because every platform has unique hashtags that resonate with more eyeballs for your content you're posting, if you're going to go that route. Number two, you got to use a platform. Don't pretend that you're going to use your mobile phone or your laptop to sit there typing in individual posts on each platform, because you cannot scale it. It doesn't work. So go with something like a Hootsuite as an example that will integrate, and you can auto schedule those posts. You don't even have to be typing this stuff. You can preload it literally and schedule it out so that you're not busy basically banging your head against the wall trying to get eyeballs and engagements up on top of that.
So I assumed the Hootsuite has actually improved, because years ago, I mean, I was early when I started using that, and it wasn't really working well with all the different platforms. But I think I was probably too early using it. But I'm assuming now that when you post something, that it's going. But so that's why I lost faith in it, to be honest with you. But I hear a lot of people now mention how good that they're finding it.
They're doing okay. Like, I would always say there's opportunity for improvement in anything. In any system design. Coming from a tech world, I know that, and I'm sure you would appreciate that as a host. And ultimately, what I would say is APIs will always have their pluses and minuses. It's really about taking advantage of that opportunity to its fullest. It's not the negative checksum, right? So you want to probably look at, for example, if I wanted to post today about your show, I have 35,000 total organic followers across, some roughly nearly 5,000 on LinkedIn on my personal Robert Zeas LinkedIn page. I have another 21,000 followers on Twitter today on Sonic Band Fan, right? And then I've got another roughly 10,000 split across multiple Facebook pages. And I could, if I wanted to, I guess I could kind of come up with a nice image with you and some captions and some keynotes and so on, and maybe even put some hashtags. But boy, is that inefficient. Wouldn't you want to have that on a schedule, like maybe 2 to 5 times a week for a period of a month or two? Because my commitment to you being your guest is I'm promoting you too, right? We're in this together. We're partners. And I'll say this philosophy also when it comes to being an artist in advertising. Don't rely on the big companies to solve all your problems, because it's not just about radio and blanket radio coverage with $100,000 to a couple $1 million spend before your tour in tier 1 and 2 markets that are high power FM. It's not even just about the Spotify campaign or the social media stuff itself. What are you doing on the ground to drive activity and behavior? So that was one of the things that was a bit of a soft spot for me with some of the artists I worked with to date, because they're not always actually willing to do the work. They love to play and they're very gifted in that realm, but boy, did they not like the idea of, hey, it's not just flyers like in the, 2000 when you're in LA at the whiskey, and people will just line up to buy your tickets. Like today, in today's world, why don't you go build some advertising platform on the back of your tour bus and get people to digitally advertise on the back of an 85-inch LED monitor, right? And now people are looking at your tour bus not just because you're Sonic Octane, but because there's something cool scrolling down the screen that they've never seen before on a highway or in a parking lot or at a festival, in a stadium parking lot for that matter. So it's really about kind of reinventing it a little bit and exploiting the advantage of each of these platforms and mediums to the extent that you can. And I think that's the approach that Sonic Octane's really won in, with Robbie Phoenixx so far behind that helm.
And what's your thoughts on the QR code? Because I know when they came out first, you needed to have an app. But I've seen a few times where they have the QR on stage at the end, and because people will take a picture, but do they ever go back? Probably not. But if you actually take the QR and say, I'm on the bus, you take the QR code, now I have all your information, that's right, straight away. So is this something that you're using?
I'll say, I love that you asked that question. And I'll say recently, and I continually do my best to learn. And as I said before, I'm not perfect. I'm imperfect, certainly in God's eye. But I've just started using something called the DOT app, DOT. So what it is basically you've got like a credit card look thingy, and to network with someone, you simply just have them scan your credit card. And it literally will give you in one shot, literally, LinkedIn, Calendly, your phone number. I'm just scrolling as we talk here, email, Twitter, Facebook, PayPal, Venmo. Like all of these apps literally get loaded into your phone, into your directory, and you click save, and now you know how to reach me, literally. Right. It's so awesome. It's even better than the QR code, in my humble opinion. Although QR codes are great for kind of like impulse, driving impulse behavior. So in stadiums, as you mentioned earlier, you are correct. Like if you've got a text SMS number application and you post a QR code and people are on their mobile phones scanning that, that'll drive a percentage of behavior in that stadium, most certainly. And there are other technologies, though. And keep in mind, I come from a tech world, so I look at it from this lens a little bit. There's geofencing. So think of back in the olden days, right? Like when the Rolling Stones decided to take their little tour down West, I believe it was 46th Street in Manhattan, with an open back truck and performing just to get eyes and ears on them before one of their tours as a media stunt. Well, there's something called geofencing today. What that means is basically take a stadium of 10 to upwards of 90,000 people, say Wembley Stadium. Foo Fighters played 3 consecutive nights and sold out. Unbelievable, right? Why don't we just capture all those cell phones, and we can define a perimeter even beyond the stadium for a number of miles, and we'll have the rights to market to those cell phones for a period of approximately 6 months after that event. So what am I pushing to them? I'm pushing join our mailing list. I'm pushing, hey, get a free such and such if you join our club, our membership club. Hey, you get advanced ticket sales before Ticketmaster gets a hold of it. Isn't that an awesome idea? Because now the brokers aren't driving up the price of tickets. So there are all these different techniques a band could potentially use. And believe me when I tell you, I'm fairly informed, having an experiential frame on that now to advise artists. And that's absolutely part of the mix that Robbie Phoenixx is engaged in, along with all the keynote stuff and all the tech consulting stuff. It's just, part of the world that I live in now and I understand pretty well.
Brilliant. And just fine, because you've done, you mentioned like 15 years of a kind of executive coaching. And I know there's a lot of coaches listening as well, and speakers. Like, what have you kind of learned because your journey, because we're constantly improving and everything. If you go back to, the 15 years ago where you could give yourself a little slap in the head and go, why was I doing? what could you help people not to do with the experience you've got?
I'll tell you straight up, I feel like I'm very social. I'm very outgoing for sure. I love people. And that comes from right here. My mother gave me a big piece of that along with God and my family. However, I was also the typical Latino, which was overworking to prove one's value, right? I worked myself to the bone in my corporate life. And I'm very proud to say that because it's really true. And that does reflect on my LinkedIn profile with all the recommendations and the $254 million of direct contribution That's even before my contributions in sales and engineering, incidentally. That's another 15.3 million combined in that time. So when you look at all that and you go, okay, what would I have done differently? You wouldn't even think this was true. But the fact is, for all those years, I was never really so confident to go knocking on the door strategically to network for myself. I was always there in the intelligence briefing when it was standing room only. And I was, believe me when I'm telling you, I can pack a room and get all attention and all eyes and ears with very experienced people in the room, appreciating the insight and the guidance. However, after hours, or at least between projects, let's say, I'm not the one surreptitiously walking on a CMO's door or a CEO's door saying, Robbie can be a little more value to you in some way, perhaps. What do you think? That just wasn't my way. I was very shy about that, even despite all the volunteering on boards that I did. So I would definitely reset that clock, my friend, Mr. Roy. I think there's always opportunity to grow.
Brilliant. Listen, I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. You might let people know how can they get in contact with you.
And thank you for that very much. The first thing I recommend, LinkedIn. So I'm at LinkedIn/in/Robert Zeas. That's Z as in zebra, EAS as in Sam. You can also find me on Twitter at Sonic Band Fan, and that's at Sonic Band Fan. So Sonic Band Fan with the @ symbol. And you can also find me on Facebook under Sonic Octane. And I'd love to have you guys, if you have any needs of any kind going forward, please know that I hope to be back on Roy's show in the near term. And we'll find some cool topics to kind of shake down and make it fun for you guys. Maybe I'll whip out some guitar and you guys can hear some music, because I promise you it's loud in here. I've got a studio that's got, tons and tons of wattage. So we'll make it happen.
Yeah, that sounds excellent. And I'll make sure that I'll put all the links that you've just mentioned, both on the audio and the video. Thank you very much for the conversation.
Thank you.
So that's all for the Speaking Podcast. As mentioned, you'll find all our episodes on speakingpodcast.com. We're on YouTube, and you'll find my 4 other podcasts along with the coaching bio.link/podcaster. Be sure to give us a thumbs up, 5-star rating, share with your friends, and also check out Robbie's music as well. And if you can, I'm not sure how it works in the different systems, but give him a 5-star rating and a review if it's possible. Until next week, take care.